Chapter 7 Beyond the Call of Duty. November is a real nice time of the year in our part of the country. I like November, but now it makes me a little sad too, because of something that happened that November. Along about the middle of the month, the first frost usually sets in around Harleyville. When you get out of town into the country on a blue sky day, with just enough wind to rustle the few leaves still clinging to the trees, why then you're in the middle of something that can't be described or photographed or anything. It's so pretty. The cover grass in the woods is brittle and brown like ashes that disintegrate wherever you put your foot. And the cold, pure, clean air goes right into your muscle and bones when you breathe it. There really is nothing like walking through the woods in autumn. It makes you so happy inside, you feel like busting. But you can't talk about it to your friends or even your family. You've just got to get out there in it and feel the sadness and prettiness of it. And when you go home, somehow it's like you've just come from church. When that first frost comes along, it takes the pollen out of the air so that the dogs can scent quail, and Papa usually takes off from work a couple of times a week to go hunting. One night right after supper, he was telling us about his day's hunt. Grig's little pointer Lou, Papa was saying, went down on a point right by the truck as we came back through Old Man Green's barn lot. We already had... Papa, interrupted Caleb, Papa, when can me and Bud go hunting? Yeah, that's right, Papa, I added quickly before he had a chance to answer. Well, said Papa. You promised us last year, but you forgot about it until it was too late, argued Caleb. You did, Papa, I reminded him. You said we could take our 22s and hunt squirrels in that big hickory grove down at Gramps. I promised you, huh? Well, I guess this weekend's as good as any, he said. Yippee! Hollered me and Caleb. And that Saturday, we must have been awake at dawn. We were lying on our beds already dressed when Papa stuck his head in our room. Time to get up, boys, he said. His eyes were still closed and he looked like he was still asleep. We're ready, Papa, whenever you are. Mm-hmm, said Papa, opening his eyes. Oh, fine. A few minutes later, we were in the front seat of Papa's car, heading out in the country toward Gramps' farm. Papa had fixed us toast and jelly for breakfast. He just drank coffee. At the last minute, Weenie and Petunia had climbed into the car, and we had to take time out to put Petunia back inside the house. Weenie crawled under the front seat where we couldn't get him out, so we had to let him come along. Well, we'll just leave him with Gramps, said Papa. The sun was just beginning to make the sky glow, up above the horizon in the east. There was a thin film of clouds over where the sun was coming up, and it began to turn painful red and purple colors as it got to be dawn. The cold air was sharp, and you could see your breath. The sun was just clearing the earth when we got to Gramps. He had been expecting us, and so there was a pot of hot coffee waiting. Even me and Caleb got to drink some, with lots of milk and sugar in it. Gramps wasn't going with us, as he had all his farm chores to attend to. Now, boys, here's the way we'll work it, began Papa, after he threw down the last part of his black coffee and chunked the big white mug down on the kitchen table. We'd taken our guns out of their cases and put our coats and caps back on, all ready to go. Weenie had crawled out of the car and was scurrying around the kitchen like he planned on going too. Well, when you hear a noise, stop. Listen and try to figure out what it is and where it's coming from. If it's a squirrel, one of us will go around on one side of the tree, and the squirrel will keep on the far side of the tree from him. Got it? That'll make a good shot for the other two. If you see any squirrels running, don't shoot at them. You couldn't hit them anyway, and you could hit a cow or a pig or even somebody. Keep those rifles on safety and don't even chamber a round of ammunition until I say it's all right. What about Weenie? Asked Caleb. We'll leave him inside. I don't want to have to keep track of him too, said Papa. He glanced around the room to see if we had forgotten anything. All right, let's go. We started out in single file, walking along a cow path toward the hickory grove. Papa led, and I was last. The sun was bright now, but it was still cold. The frost hung on the grass and leaves so that they didn't even crunch when you walked on them. We walked a long way without saying anything. The woods were enough to absorb our thoughts. All about us lay the quiet, bright beauty of autumn. As I was walking along, I began to notice noises behind me. breathing sounds, and the sound of soft, careful footpads in the leaves. When I turned around, I wasn't really too surprised to see Weenie. He had gotten out of Gramps' house somehow and was following along as quietly as he knew how. When I looked at him, he whined softly and then rolled over on his back and pawed the air. He knew that he should have been back at home in the first place, but he just couldn't stand it. He had to come hunting with us. Beat me, his eyes seemed to say. Kick me, do anything, but let me come along. Papa, I called. Papa turned around. What? Oh, for cat's sakes, did that mutt follow us clear out here? I guess he did, I answered, although it was pretty obvious. Well, he might as well tag along now. We don't want to take the time to go back. If he starts barking when we get to the grove, I'm going to tie him in a knot round a tree somewhere, said Papa. But I don't think he really would have. We went on over hills and down, through valleys, until I didn't have any idea where we were. Weenie stayed at my heels, quiet as a long mouse. Finally, up ahead of us, I could see a patch of gold up in some tall trees that told me we were near the hickory grove. Now slow down, whispered Papa. We want to work up to it gradually. When we got a little closer, I heard a sound like a woodpecker, but I knew it was a squirrel somewhere up above us, working on a hickory nut. Papa and Caleb heard it too, and Papa motioned me round to the left. Carefully, I circled around to the opposite side of the big tree Papa had pointed to. Looking back, I saw Caleb's red cap. He was aiming his rifle up in the tree, and Papa was standing right behind him, trying to help. I waited for a couple of minutes, and then, blam! I crashed through the scrub toward them. Did you hit him, Caleb? Where's the squirrel? I yelled. Nah, he missed, said Papa disgustedly. He peeled bark about 4 feet over that squirrel and off to the left. How many times have I told you to squeeze the trigger, not try to jerk it? A whole lot of times, Papa, admitted Caleb. Well, where did that squirrel go, Papa? It's my shot next. He's holed up by now, said Papa. We'll keep moving. Before long, we heard another noise like a woodpecker, and this time I saw him. He was sitting up on a high limb chewing on a hickory nut, making that funny noise. I pointed and everybody froze. Papa tiptoed over to me and I sighted in. I could see that fat little rascal perched right on the end of my front sight as I pulled the trigger. You missed too, said Papa. We continued on through the woods, and after a while, Caleb shot him a squirrel. You'd have thought it was a moose or something the way he went on, and it wasn't long until I got one too. By 9 o'clock, Papa had 4 gray squirrels in the game pocket of his coat. I think we've scared them all out of the grove, boys, said Papa, right after Caleb had killed number 4 with a real good kneeling shot. Let's move along the creek bed and see if we find any more there. The creek wound around like a crazy snake, and we walked along slowly beside it. Along both sides of the creek, we began to run into little limestone cliffs that were from 10 to 20 feet above the level of the water, but we didn't see any more squirrels. We'd gone about a half mile, staying parallel to the creek, when we heard Weenie begin to bark some distance behind us. I hadn't even missed him. What's the matter with Weenie? Asked Caleb. Why is he barking like that? Papa listened for a minute. If I didn't know better, said Papa, I'd say that he was running a squirrel. That's the way a good hound sounds off when he's close to one. But Weenie wouldn't know about that, being a town dog. I don't know what it is. We kept listening, and the sounds came closer. Then we saw him. He was up on top of the hill, falling and rolling and yipping his way in hot pursuit of a red fox squirrel who was moving down that hill like a rat from a fire. Weenie was pathetic. He was so excited. I guess he knew he might not ever again have a chance to run a squirrel in our direction. His long, awkward body was having quite a time getting over rocks and logs and things, but he managed to stay close to that squirrel through sheer determination. Well, bless him, boys, will you look at there, said Papa, surprised and kind of proud at the same time. He's running that squirrel right to us, just like a real hunting dog would. It's my turn, I reminded him. Better let me have this one, Bud, said Papa. He's moving too fast for you to hit with your .22. Swiftly, Papa poked a shell into his .20 gauge and waited. Sure enough, whenever the squirrel tried to turn off to the side, Weenie would let out a terrible series of yelps, and that squirrel would straighten out almost immediately. They were both coming down that hill at full speed, and I suddenly noticed the little cliff that separated them from the creek. It was about 15 feet high, and the creek bed below was all rock. They kept coming too, all 8 of those little short legs moving like pistons. Papa cocked a shotgun and waited. The squirrel had had a hard time maintaining a 10-foot lead, and when he got to the ledge, there was no question about what he was going to do. He took a few fast steps and leaped out into nothing but clean, fall air, spreading the loose skin between his legs like he thought he was a glider. Papa had sighted in and caught him perfectly in midair about 3 feet from the creek bank. But I had stopped watching the squirrel. I was watching Weenie, and so was Caleb. Poor Weenie had been going so fast he didn't have a chance in the world to stop before he got to the edge. Suddenly it was right before him. He tried hard to stop himself and slide down. I can still remember the puzzled look on his face, but it was too steep and his momentum was too great. He fell through the air silently, struggling to keep his feet beneath his body. Then he hit one of the big rocks in the creek bed and lay still. "How was that shot?" asked Papa. All I could do was point to the creek bed where Weenie lay. "Good Lord," said Papa, realizing what had happened for the first time. All three of us raced to the spot and got there at about the same time. We could tell it was a bad accident for Weenie. His front paws were crumpled underneath him, and his long, funny body was bent all wrong. Papa tried to feel his back, and Weenie turned his head around slowly and licked Papa's hand. You could tell it hurt Weenie to move. "It's broken," said Papa. Me and Caleb looked at each other, and then back to Papa. Papa wouldn't look at us. "Can the vet fix it, Papa?" asked Caleb. "I'll carry him back to the car." Caleb looked funny. He looked pale. All of a sudden I felt the same way. "No, Caleb," said Papa. Weenie laid his head down in Papa's hand and whined real quietly, and then me and Caleb knew. "Start on back," said Papa quietly. "Give me your 22 before you go, bud." I was frozen there, and Caleb looked at me with big eyes. I thought about all the times I'd used Weenie for a pillow in front of the fireplace, reading the comics, and I knew that Papa had just started to love Weenie this morning when he saw him chasing that red squirrel. Papa was reaching out for me to give him my rifle. "I'll do it, Papa," I said. Papa looked at me kind of funny, like he didn't understand at first, and then like he thought more of me for saying it. "You better let me," he said. "I want to," I said. "I know him better than you do." "All right," said Papa. "We'll wait for you back in the grove." Weenie hurt bad. He wanted to try to get up and walk away from the pain, but his hind legs wouldn't move, and he didn't understand. He looked up at me as Caleb and Papa started to walk away, like he wanted me to help him get up and go too. I smoothed his coat the best I could before I clambered into the little 22 shell and took off the safety. I could feel Weenie's muzzle warm in my hand, but I couldn't see him very well. Caleb and Papa were waiting for me in the grove. He was brave, I told them. He was very brave.